On February 4th, I failed the OSCP with 60 points. I was so close to passing. So I took some time to practice, go through more machines. And on March 20th, I took the OSCP for the second time, but this time I passed. I not only passed, but I fully compromised every machine in the environment. Maybe we could call that OSCP with distinction? Shout out to Gotham Sharma for that idea. In this video, I'm going to share my top 20 tips that help me go from fail to full points on the OSCP. These are tips that I wrote for myself. I slowly accumulated them over 6 months of studying, and a lot of them, the key ones, came about from between my first attempt and my second attempt. Tip number 1, and maybe the most important, is enumerate, enumerate, enumerate. We hear this word often, but I don't think we really get what it means. To enumerate means to exhaustively number, to just go 1, 2, 3, 4, go through the entire list of all possible options and try them, test them. So you do a TCP scan of all 65,535 ports. You scan through all those ports. You find every service that's running on those ports. What version number is it? What tools can I use to access that service? Are there any known vulnerabilities for that particular version of the software out there somewhere in the wild? What tools can I use and what information can I gather using those tools? This is often the path forward. If you get stuck on the OSCP and you think, oh, I've exhausted all options, it's not true, because if you exhausted all options, you would be on to the next step already. So if you get stuck, further enumeration is almost always the answer. This happened to me. I was taking the exam. I thought, oh, I've looked through everything, I've looked over here in this port, that port, this service. There was one service on one port I didn't really look at. I wasn't very familiar with it. I thought, okay, this has to be the answer because nothing else is working. I focused on that one single service. I enumerated through it. It took a long time, but ultimately that got me to the next step. Tip 2, don't settle for one tool. If you like Derb, try using Dirbuster, GoBuster, FerrixBuster, any other buster. The reason is one tool might fail you. You'll be trying something and it's just not working. You get no output because it fails to work for some reason. Or it could be you're getting false positives or false negatives and you won't know unless you can confirm with another tool. So I highly recommend, as you're studying for the OSCP, get familiar with multiple tools and go into the exam ready with multiple tools ready to go. Tip 3, don't skip easy wins. For example, you could be on the exam and you run into an authenticated remote code execution vulnerability. And you think to yourself, this is impossible. I don't have any credentials. I know the vulnerability is there. I know this version of the software is vulnerable to it, but I don't have credentials. It's impossible. And yes, it is impossible until you get credentials. It could be because you skipped an easy win. In this case, it could be that the easy win was port 21, FTP, allowed anonymous login. You log in and through some pathway, whether the credentials are right there or they're somehow hidden away, you find credentials. Now that you have the credentials, the impossible becomes possible. So I highly recommend keep a list of some easy wins that you can go to first, enumerate those first. It will save you a lot of time and frustration. So anonymous login on FTP is one, anonymous login on SMB would be another. There's a couple others. I'm sure if you look through your notes, you'll find those. That there's just these easy wins that you can keep a list of. Look for those first. Tip number 4, be specific in your web searches for exploits and vulnerabilities. So if you found an initial foothold on a box and you're looking to Privesk and you found an interesting piece of software called Bob's Accounting Software, don't just search for Bob's Accounting Software, but add in some keywords: exploit, vulnerability, privilege escalation, Privesk, in sites that are sources as well, like GitHub, Twitter, or Reddit. A personal favorite of mine is to use the Google search operator site, followed by github.com, then the CVE number, the full CVE number, right? So CVE-2024-1086. Stay tuned, I'm doing a video on that coming up, by the way. The reason you do this is GitHub is a repository. You are much more likely to find actual POCs and code on GitHub, whereas a more general search or searching in other sources, you might find news articles, commentary, vulnerability scores, and these other things that are just not helpful for you on the exam. So you want to filter that stuff out and really focus on what's going to help you. So try to find actual exploits, the actual code. That's what you're looking for. So use specific searches And the example I just used with GitHub, I think is a really great place to start. Tip number 5, spray, spray, spray. Keep a text file of all the usernames you come across. Keep a text file of all the passwords that you come across. And make sure that you spray usernames as passwords. So what that means is when you find the username Mark,
Oh, hi, Mark.
make sure that you try Mark as the username and Mark is the password for whatever service. And make sure you spray every service. If there's anything you can spray, FTP, SSH, SMB, a web login, remote anything login, a WordPress login, spray everywhere. That's part of tip number 1 of enumerate, enumerate, enumerate. One way you do that is to spray so that you can get more information back. What you want to do as well is create a third file when you go to spray. So you have your username file, you have your passwords file. An easy way to then spray usernames as passwords is just to make a third password file where you take all the usernames and add it into the password file in this third file. That way your password file doesn't get usernames added to it because you want to keep that password file. These are actual passwords I found that work somewhere or were written down somewhere, used by someone somewhere. And you don't want to mix up potential passwords with actual used passwords. So you create this third file where you take all your current passwords, add all the usernames into that, and then you spray with those with the username file, and then the updated secondary password file for spraying. And this way you can have clean records of the passwords you've come across, but also do a bit harder of a spray by adding in usernames as well. So wherever you go, when you find a service, spray. And whenever you get a new set of credentials, you have to go back and then spray everything that you've already sprayed. That's just a part of the process. Enumerate, 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 and spray, spray, spray. Tip number 6, always check for default credentials. If you run into Bob's accounting service, and that's the piece of software that you think, okay, this is the critical path, this is the path forward, search for Bob's accounting service default credentials. If you can find out the specific version number of Bob's accounting software, include that in your search, because sometimes I've seen this where the default credentials for a particular piece of software get updated as the software gets updated. So make sure that you add those default passwords, default usernames. You could try those as they are, those pairs of admin, admin, login for this particular service, but also add those into your potential password list and your potential username list when you go to spray, because it could be that Mark, who's the admin, left the username as admin, but then changed the password to Mark, because it might be a little more secure than admin. So always be on the lookout for default credentials and build that into your spraying. Tip number 7 is be flexible, but persistent. For example, you might be trying to get a reverse shell on a machine to get access to it, and a staged shell isn't working, so try a stageless one. Port 443 isn't working. Okay, try port 80. Maybe the machine's not working and you have to revert. Anytime you revert a machine, you definitely want to go back to all of your steps that you attempted and retry those, because it could be that you were doing the right things, but there was some technical issue with the machine and it wasn't working. That's all a part of just being flexible and persistent. And you'll see this come up time and time again. It's just something that you need to do, and it's a character trait I think you can build the more you practice. Practice more machines, practice more different software, different attacks and approaches, and the more you get a feel for like, okay, I kind of feel what's going on here. This is probably a situation where I just need to persist, or what, this isn't working. I need to back up. I need to try something else and be flexible. Tip number 8, know what you're doing, which might be a very scary thing for you to hear, because you might feel, as I often did, I don't know what I'm doing.
What are you talking about, you psycho? You know how to drive?
Not everybody knows how to do everything. Driving isn't the only thing.
Just move your car. Okay. I don't know how. I just grabbed the steering wheel.
Fine.
Ow!
There are many times where I'm running a new tool, trying a new exploit, a new methodology, and I just feel I don't know what I'm doing. And that's okay if you start there, but don't stay in that place where you feel like, I don't know what I'm doing. Go read the documentation, the man page. If there's official docs, go read those. If there's a blog post on it, go read those. Make sure that you're reading until you understand what it's doing. If you can read the comments inside the code, if you can read the code itself, that's best. That's the best place to be, where you actually know what you're doing. On a similar note, don't run exploits blindly. They might not work the way you expect. You might not get the results that you expect. I had this happen on one machine that I was working on, and this is in the Proving Grounds practice, one of those boxes. And The exploit was perfectly lined up. Everything, as far as I read, should have worked, and it wasn't. It's one of those moments where you're thinking, I'm doing this right. Why isn't this working? It's so frustrating. And unfortunately, in the README and in the documentation, it did not mention that you had to run a netcat command on a particular port at the same time. It was like a comment in the code. Oh, by the way, do this. So when you find exploits, these are not often officially produced by the software makers themselves. It's just hackers like us out there. We find these, we create a POC, we share it on a GitHub, and unfortunately, sometimes these are not very well documented. And so I highly encourage you to actually read through what you're doing and make sure that you know what you're doing. So before you run your next exploit, ask yourself this question: do I know what this is doing? Have I looked through the code, the documentation? And that way you're not just getting the results that you want, which I know that's the short-term thing. Oh, I want this to work. I want to get the flag. But you actually start to understand how these exploits work. So then you start to get a sense of, aha, these are the kind of attack vectors that people use, or these are the kind of methodologies people use, or these are the nuts and bolts, the underlying technologies and how they're working, so that in the future, you can be better at understanding them and maybe creating some yourself. Tip number 9, if there is a Metasploit module for it, there is a manual exploit for it. That means is, if you find a Metasploit module and think, oh, like I don't want to use Metasploit because on the test, there are certain modules you can only use once on the exam. And you might think, oh, like, well, what if I run into that situation? There's always a manual exploit. You just have to search for it. On the both exams that I took, I never used the one-time use Metasploit modules. There wasn't a need to, because I was able to find the manual ones. I've gotten in the practice of find the manual exploit, understand what it's doing, and adjust it until it works the way I need it to accomplish the goal in front of me. So I just want to encourage you, if you find the Metasploit module, especially when you're practicing, try and find the manual one and run it. That's the way you're going to learn. Tip number 10, try another exploit with the same vulnerability. If you're using an exploit and it has some functionality, or it seems to be working a bit, but it's not getting you your goal, it's not really working, the shell's not interactive enough, the shell dies too quickly, you're just getting some sort of partial feedback or partial progress, let's say. Try another exploit with the same vulnerability. It is highly unlikely that OffSec is going to put a vulnerability on the exam that relies on one person's GitHub staying online. So if you find a vulnerability and you find an exploit for it, and you think, oh, this is the only one I could find for it, you probably just haven't searched far enough. If it is the actual vulnerability that exists, there will be multiple exploits for it. That's part of the challenge is, can you find the right one? Can you manipulate it and change it to fit the needs of your situation? And so if you get stuck on one and you really try manipulating it, changing it, it's not working with different parameters, you have to convert it from Python 2 to Python 3, and that's a huge hassle. You're getting stuck in, there's lots of problems, right, that can happen. Just try another exploit. And if you go back to tip 4 on web searches, that will help you to do that. Tip number 11, grep all of your results. So you know that you need to take good notes. What commands am I putting in? What tools am I using? And the full output of all my commands that I run. Take those outputs and grep through them. Look for specific keywords. This is an exam, right? It has a time constraint. So you don't have the benefit of being able to go through everything line by line. If you can get faster at going line by line and being very meticulous, at some points you might need to be, then yes, do that. And when you get out into a real pen test, absolutely, go line by line, be very meticulous. In the exam, you're trying to get to the next step, and it has a time constraint. So learn to grep for keywords, learn your tools, and those tools might have certain keywords or phrases or things they use to highlight results. Or it could be a username, a port, an IP number, a service, a file, whatever you're looking for, grep for that. I'll give you an example. When I use linps and winps to look for privesc opportunities, what I do is I look for CVE. That's a key one that I look for. I want to know what vulnerabilities exist here. So grepping for CVE is a good one. With linps, grep for unknown SUID binary. That's a good one. So the more practice you get, the more you're going to know, okay, these are the keywords. You might build a couple scripts like I did in Python that will take your outputs and then grep for these keywords, tell you what line they're on. You can go back and look and get the full details and then begin to explore that opportunity. So learn your tools and learn to grep for keywords, and even building some small helper scripts for you along the way can prove to be very helpful in getting that speed, which you're going to need. Tip 12, work on your weaknesses. Between the first attempt and the second attempt on the OSCP, I felt my weakness was Privesc. And so I took the Tiberius Windows Privesc and Windows Privesc courses. They were each only a few hours, but I found them very helpful. And on the exam, on my first standalone, from the initial foothold to Privesc, it was 5 minutes. I got that one quite fast. My other boxes, it was an hour and 30, another an hour and 20, but I found working on my weakness made me feel a lot stronger and more prepared to go into my second attempt, and it showed. Tip 13, if a machine is slow when you first access it, straight to revert.
Right to jail, right away.
Revert it immediately. It's not worth the time. You can revert a machine in 1 minute, and that could end up saving you 30 minutes. You might work on a machine for 1 hour if it's snappy. You might work on it for an hour and a half if it's slow. So, and you got to think of the frustration as well. Oh, I spent extra 30 minutes. Why is this moving so slow? Which brings me to my next tip. Tip number 14, manage your energy. It's a 24-hour exam, which means there is definitely a physical component to the exam. So getting good sleep the week leading up to the exam is super important. Also, try to schedule your exam for the morning and don't do what I did on my first exam, which was, I don't want to push it off of, another week, another 2 weeks. I scheduled it for 8 p.m. So my first exam, I started at 8 p.m. and I went all 24 hours. I went until 8 p.m. the next day. I got 2.5 hours of sleep. I took a couple breaks for snacks and food, bathroom, etc. And I just did not manage my energy well. And part of that was the time that it started. My second exam, I started at 10 a.m. and I had enough points to pass by 8:30 p.m. I made sure I took a little bit longer breaks. I stretched, I drank water, I slept more, and I booked the exam in the morning. That was huge. So at 8:30 p.m. I could have stopped. I had 70 points, but I wanted to finish it. And so I went on, and then it took me another 6 hours until 2:30. At 2:30 a.m., I'd fully compromised everything. I was done with the exam, and I had many hours to spare, right? So the key thing for me was how to manage my energy and booking the exam in the morning. Tip number 15 is to have a strategy and manage your time. My strategy was to start with the Active Directory set first and then move on to the standalone machines. Another part of that strategy was to give each box a set time. So for the standalone machines, I gave 2 hours for initial foothold and 2 hours for Privesc. If I didn't hit those goals, I would move on to the next box. It just gave me time to think. It gave me just a fresh, look at it when I would come back to it, and it would help me not get stuck and frustrated for 6-8 hours on end. So I highly recommend you set a specific time for each box and then use that as a guideline for when you just move on, and you can always come back later. For the Active Directory set, I gave myself 4 hours to make progress. And if I didn't make progress in 4 hours, I would move on to the standalone machine. This is exactly what happened on my second attempt at the OSCP. I started at 10 a.m. and by 2 p.m., I had made little progress and 0 points. 0. And I was frustrated. I was kind of thinking, am I going to pass this test? Am I going to fail again? It was really stressful at that time. So I moved on to the standalones, and thankfully, I compromised the 3 standalones in 6.5 hours, had enough points to pass the exam, came back to the Active Directory, and then I was domain controller in 6 hours. So have a strategy and manage your time. Tip number 16, nothing replaces practice. Hands-on keys, going through boxes, trying new tools, going through GitHub repos, talking to people on Discord, reading blogs, just exploring, being curious, doing the thing itself. I know, it's endless. There's so much to learn. There's so many things to try, so many new tools, so many things, books to read, courses to do. It really can feel endless, I understand. But if you've gotten this far in your OSCP journey and in this long video, then I trust that you have the passion that will pull you through, and you will just be consistently, persistently chasing after this. You're always practicing, you're always learning new things. And that's tip number 16. Tip number 17, do yourself a favor and get the 10 bonus points. To do that, you have to complete 80% of the course labs, and you have to get 30 of the flags from the challenge labs. As I said in my previous tip, nothing replaces practice, and this is one way to do it. The main reason to do it is not the points itself. It's because by doing it, you will be so much more prepared to take the OSCP. I went for the 10 bonus points, and it wasn't make or break for me on the second attempt that I did pass. It was a nice kind of cherry on top, but it really helped me prepare. So I would say go for the 10 bonus points, and it will help you a lot along the way as you're learning. Also, the OSCP certification means absolutely nothing if you don't acquire the skill set and the mindset that it represents. And so don't think of it as I just want to get a 70 and be done with it. Think of it as I want to learn these skills and this skill set and this mindset so that I can be an outstanding penetration tester. And if you do that, and that's the goal you're shooting for, and you spend enough time chasing that goal, you will most certainly pass the OSCP. So do yourself a favor and get the 10 bonus points. And yes, the 10 bonus points might also help you pass because the way the points, there's some interesting breakpoints. So the Active Directory set is 40 points and it's all or nothing. So if you don't get domain controller, even if you compromise everything else, you get 0 points for the Active Directory set. The standalone machines are a maximum of 60 points. So if you don't get the Active Directory, but you get all of the other standalone boxes, you need the 10 bonus points to pass the exam. So I think it's great to learn the skills that you'll learn. It might save you on the exam for a passing score. And another benefit to this is that it really just gives you this boost of confidence going into the exam, knowing, okay, I already have 10 points and the clock hasn't even started. I haven't even put hands to keys yet, and I have 10 points. That will help you and give you that, that comfort, that encouragement, which you're going to need during the OSCP as well. Tip 18 is to do the Proving Grounds practice boxes. If you've done the entire Pen 200 course and you have at least 30 flags from the challenge labs, which this secures your 10 bonus points, and you still feel like, oh, I need some practice, do the Proving Grounds practice boxes. Try Hack Me is great, Hack the Box is great, but OffSec creates the OSCP exam, and OffSec creates the Proving Grounds practice boxes. So you not only get practice, which is invaluable, but you also get a sense of, okay, this is how OffSec creates vulnerable machines. From my first attempt to my second attempt, I did about 25 or 30 of these boxes, and I found it very helpful for me. Tip number 19 is stay calm and don't lose hope. On my second attempt, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., I made what felt like 0 progress, and I had 0 points. And I thought, I just wasted 4 hours. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to get the Active Directory set. This means I have to have a perfect score on the rest of the exam to pass. The 60 from the standalones plus my 10 bonus points. I was freaking out. But then I took a deep breath, I calmed down, and I just kept moving forward. I focused on my strategy, I focused on the task at hand, and ultimately I went on to ace the exam. So this isn't unique. This happens to other people as well. I've read a number of stories. People get stuck for 2 hours, 4 hours, even 8 hours they get stuck. They still go on to pass the exam. So when you get stuck, calm down and don't lose hope. Tip number 20, if you've come this far, you know there is only one tip remaining, and you know what that tip is. When all else fails, try harder. And you'll hear this over and over again. And the nuance of what try harder means, it doesn't mean just bang your head against the wall and just grit your teeth and just keep going. Try harder means getting some rest. It means trying a new approach. It means sitting back and refocusing your mind. It can be trying to look at the problem from a different angle, moving on to another problem to come back to that one later. The key thing is try. Like, never give up. Don't quit. On my first exam, yes, I failed, but I was proud of myself. I spent 6 hours, well, I can't get into the details of exactly what I did, but I spent 6 hours doing something, and I'm really proud of that thing that I did, and I wish I could say what it was, but I can't because it's on the exam. But yeah, I spent a lot of time really trying, and I went all 24, technically 23 hours and 45 minutes because they cut you off with 15 minutes to go, which was a surprise to me, but it's right there in the OffSec exam guide. But anyway, I went the whole time, and I failed the exam at the end, but I felt good about myself for pushing myself to continue and not get discouraged. And on the second exam, which I got full points on, I also had to try harder. It was just another opportunity to try harder. It's not as if it just became magically easy, everything clicked, and I just passed, It really was hard. The second exam was not easy. I got full points, but it was not a breeze. And so I just want to encourage you that while the exam is difficult, it is passable, obviously. And if you really focus and try harder, you may pass, you might not, but that will help you grow. You'll learn through the whole process, and sooner or later, you will pass, like I did. Thank you, everyone that is connected with me here on LinkedIn and is following me on YouTube, where I share all of my videos. If you found a tip particularly useful today, feel free to share and comment below what was your most helpful tip. And if you have your own tips that you want to share or any questions that you have, feel free to comment below as well. I'll try to answer those questions as best I can. That is all for this video. We're going to end it here. I hope you enjoyed all 20 tips. And until next time, have fun and stay curious, and good luck on your OSCP.